The ships came on a Tuesday morning in April. They appeared without warning, without sound, without any of the drama that Hollywood movies had promised for decades. One moment the sky was empty. The next moment, 17 massive vessels hung above the major cities of Earth like dark clouds made of metal and light. People screamed. People ran. People prayed. Governments activated emergency protocols that had been written as jokes and filed away in dusty cabinets. Nuclear weapons were armed. Fighter jets scrambled into the air like angry wasps defending a threatened hive. But the ships did nothing. They simply waited. 3 days passed before the message came. It arrived on every screen, every phone, every radio frequency on the planet. The being that spoke looked like an insect standing upright, with compound eyes that reflected light in disturbing patterns and mandibles that clicked together when it paused between words. "We are the Veloxi," the creature said. "Representatives of the Galactic Hegemony, we come with an offer. We wish to speak with your leaders." The United Nations emergency session that followed was the largest gathering of world leaders in human history. They met in Geneva, in a building surrounded by soldiers and tanks, and enough firepower to level a small country. Not that anyone believed it would matter against beings who could cross the stars. Ambassador Kethforin descended from the lead ship in a smaller craft that made no noise as it landed. He walked into the assembly hall with 4 guards behind him, each one belonging to a different alien species. One looked like a walking tree. Another seemed to be made of living stone. The third resembled a tiger that had learned to stand on 2 legs. The fourth was almost human, except for the blue skin and the extra set of arms. The message was clear. The hegemony was vast. The hegemony was powerful. The hegemony contained multitudes. Kethforin spoke for 3 hours. He explained that the galaxy was at war. For 10,000 years, the civilizations of the hegemony had fought against an enemy called the Void Swarm. These creatures consumed everything in their path. They had destroyed 1,000 worlds. They had eaten civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They were endless, tireless, and utterly without mercy. The hegemony needed soldiers. They needed fighters. They needed species willing to stand on the front lines and hold back the darkness. "We have watched your world for many years," Kethforin said. His compound eyes swept across the assembled leaders. "We have studied your history, your wars, your violence. We have seen what humans do to each other. We have witnessed your capacity for destruction." He paused. His mandibles clicked together 3 times. "We believe you would make excellent warriors." The offer was simple. Earth would provide 5,000 soldiers. The hegemony would train them, arm them, and transport them to the front lines. In exchange, Earth would receive protection from the Void Swarm and access to technologies that would solve most of humanity's problems. Clean energy, medical advances, faster than light travel. The price was blood, human blood. General Sarah Chen sat in the back of the assembly hall and watched. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen 3 wars. She had commanded soldiers in deserts and jungles and frozen mountains. She had written letters to the families of the dead. She had held dying men and women in her arms and promised them that their sacrifice meant something. She knew what the Veloxi were really asking for. They wanted cannon fodder. They wanted disposable troops to throw at an enemy that had been grinding down their forces for millennia. They had seen humanity's wars and concluded that humans were violent, primitive, and cheap to replace. They expected Earth to send its most aggressive killers, its most brutal fighters, its most savage warriors. They expected monsters. General Chen raised her hand. The assembly fell silent. Even Kethforin turned to look at her with his thousands of tiny eye lenses. "You say you have studied our wars," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "You have watched us fight each other for centuries. You have seen our violence." "Yes," Kethforin replied. "Your species is remarkably efficient at killing. It is why we chose to make this offer." "I see." General Chen stood up slowly. She walked down the aisle toward the alien ambassador, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. "Then I have a question for you, Ambassador. Just one question." Kethvorin's antennae twitched. "Ask." "You have studied our wars, but have you studied how we win them?" The ambassador was silent for a long moment. His mandibles clicked once, twice, 3 times. "I do not understand the distinction," he finally said. General Chen smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. It was the smile of a chess player who had just realized that her opponent did not understand the rules of the game. "No," she said softly, "I don't suppose you do." The vote took place 1 week later. Every nation on Earth participated. The result was nearly unanimous. Humanity would accept the offer. They would send their warriors to the stars. But they would do it their way. General Chen was appointed to lead the selection committee. She gathered the finest military minds on the planet and locked herself in a room with them for 3 days. When they emerged, they had a plan. The Veloxy expected savages. The Veloxy expected killers. The Veloxy expected the worst that humanity had to offer. General Chen intended to give them something else entirely. She intended to show them what humans really were, what they had always been, underneath the violence and the bloodshed and the 10,000 years of fighting each other. Survivors, builders, stubborn, impossible, endlessly creative survivors. The Veloxy had studied human wars. They had watched humans kill, but they had never bothered to ask the most important question of all. How had humanity survived those wars? How had they rebuilt after every disaster? How had they kept going when everything seemed lost? The answer was not violence. The answer was something far more dangerous. The answer was hope. And General Chen was about to teach the entire galaxy what that meant. The selection centers opened in 47 countries on the same day. Millions of people applied. Young men with muscles and anger in their eyes. Former soldiers hungry for another war. Mercenaries looking for the ultimate contract. Professional fighters who had spent their lives training to hurt other human beings. General Chen rejected most of them. The Veloxy observers watched the process with growing confusion. They had expected humanity to send its deadliest killers, its most violent criminals, its genetically enhanced supersoldiers. Instead, they saw something that made no sense to their compound eyes. Colonel Marcus Webb was one of the first people selected. He was 51 years old with a bad knee and gray at his temples. He had served in 3 conflicts over 20 years, but he was not famous for killing. He was famous for talking. In his last deployment, Webb had walked into an enemy stronghold with no weapons and no backup. He had spent 6 hours sitting across a table from a warlord who had sworn to kill every American soldier he could find. When Webb walked out, he carried a ceasefire agreement that should have been impossible. "Why him?" the Veloxy liaison asked General Chen. "His combat statistics are unremarkable. He has not killed a significant number of enemies." "He ended a war without firing a shot," Chen replied. "How many of your soldiers can say the same?" Captain Yuki Tanaka was selected next. She was an engineer, not a fighter. She had spent most of her military career building things instead of destroying them. But during a desperate retreat in a conflict zone, she had held a bridge for 6 hours against overwhelming enemy forces. She had used construction equipment as weapons. She had improvised explosives from farming chemicals. She had turned a bulldozer into a tank. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found Tanaka standing on a pile of rubble, covered in blood and dust and diesel fuel, calmly directing traffic across the bridge she had refused to let fall. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a combat medic who had performed surgery in a bombed hospital with no electricity and almost no supplies. Corporal James Adebio was a farmer's son from Nigeria who had kept his village alive during a famine by inventing new irrigation techniques from garbage and prayer. Lieutenant Kim Soo-yeon was a translator who spoke 7 languages and had saved hundreds of refugees by talking her way through checkpoints that should have been death sentences. The list went on. Teachers who had kept schools running during occupations, engineers who had rebuilt power grids while bombs fell around them, logistics officers who had fed armies across 3 continents, computer specialists who had cracked enemy communications with nothing but outdated laptops and stubbornness. Yes, there were soldiers too, but not the kind the Veloxy expected. These were soldiers known for thinking instead of just fighting. Soldiers who had survived impossible situations by being smarter than their enemies. Soldiers who knew that the greatest victory was the battle that never had to be fought. The final selection numbered exactly 5,000. They gathered at a training facility in Switzerland for 2 weeks of preparation before departure. Colonel Webb addressed them on the first day. "The Veloxy think they know what we are," he said. He stood on a platform in front of 5,000 faces from every corner of Earth. "They have watched our wars. They have seen our violence. They believe we are savages who are useful only for dying." He paused and looked out at the crowd. "They are wrong. We are not going to the stars to die. We are going to the stars to do what humans have always done. We are going to survive. We are going to adapt. We are going to solve problems that no one else can solve. And we are going to show the galaxy what humanity really is." Captain Tanaka stood beside him. She had been appointed as second in command because she understood something that most military leaders did not. War was not just about killing. War was about building and breaking, about logistics and supply lines, about keeping soldiers fed and equipped and alive long enough to see victory. "Every person here has a specialty," she told the assembled soldiers. "Some of you are fighters, some are healers, some are builders, some are talkers. You were not chosen because you are the deadliest humans on Earth. You were chosen because you are the most adaptable, the most creative, the most stubborn." The Veloxy observers stood at the back of the assembly hall and whispered to each other in their clicking language. They did not understand. These humans looked ordinary. They looked weak. They looked nothing like the bloodthirsty warriors that the Veloxy had expected. One of the observers approached General Chen after the assembly. He was younger than Kethforin, with brighter colors on his exoskeleton. "Your choices confuse us," he said. "Where are your elite soldiers, your special forces, your chemically enhanced warriors?" "We sent you exactly what you asked for," Chen replied. "You wanted our strongest warriors. You wanted the humans most likely to survive and win. That is what we gave you. But they are not fighters. Many of them have never killed anyone." General Chen looked at the young Veloxy for a long moment. Then she smiled the same smile she had shown to Kethforin weeks ago. "You know what makes a warrior strong?" she asked. "It is not muscles. It is not weapons. It is not the willingness to kill. It is the ability to keep going when everything seems lost. The ability to adapt when the plan falls apart. The ability to find hope in the darkness." She gestured toward the assembled humans. Every person in that room has faced impossible situations. Every one of them has survived when survival seemed impossible. Every one of them has won battles that could not be won. She leaned closer to the Veloxy. "You wanted warriors. We sent you survivors. In the long run, there is no difference." 2 days later, the human contingent boarded the transport ships and left Earth behind. They carried weapons and supplies and equipment. They carried training manuals and medical kits and engineering tools. But most importantly, they carried something that the Veloxy did not understand and could not measure. They carried the knowledge of what it meant to be human, the knowledge of 10,000 years of survival against impossible odds, the knowledge of building and rebuilding, of falling and rising, of losing everything and starting again. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. Station Korath 7 was the ugliest place Colonel Webb had ever seen. It hung in space like a wounded animal, covered in scars from 1,000 battles. The metal walls were patched and repatched. The corridors smelled of recycled air and alien sweat and something that might have been fear. The human contingent arrived to find themselves assigned to Sector 9. This was the most dangerous part of the station's defensive perimeter, a maze of asteroid fields and dead moons that the Void Swarm used as an infiltration corridor. The casualty rate for troops stationed in Sector 9 was 60% per year. The Veloxy commanders called it an honor. Everyone else called it a death sentence. The first month was disaster. Human tactics did not match hegemony doctrine. The Veloxy military operated on rigid hierarchies. Orders came from the top and flowed downward without question. Soldiers were expected to follow commands exactly as given, with no deviation and no creativity. Humans did not work that way. During the first major engagement, a squad led by Sergeant Paulo Rivera found themselves cut off from the main force. The Veloxy commander ordered them to hold position and wait for reinforcements. Rivera looked at the swarm of enemy creatures pouring through the asteroid field and made a different choice. He led his squad through a narrow gap in the rocks, using mining equipment to seal the passage behind them. They emerged on the enemy's flank and destroyed a swarm control node that the hegemony had been trying to reach for months. The Veloxy commander was furious. Rivera had disobeyed a direct order. He had endangered his squad. He had violated 17 different military regulations. He had also won a victory that saved 200 lives. This pattern repeated itself again and again. Humans adapted mid-battle without waiting for authorization. They shared information across squad boundaries. They improvised solutions using whatever materials were available. They did things that made no sense according to Veloxy tactical doctrine, but somehow worked anyway. The alien commanders began drafting reports about humanity's unsuitability for military service. They recommended disbanding the human contingent and sending them home in disgrace. Then Captain Tanaka noticed something. She had been studying the Void Swarm attack patterns for weeks, not as a soldier but as an engineer. She looked at the data the same way she would look at a broken machine. Where was the logic? Where was the system? What was the underlying pattern? The Veloxy saw the swarm as an enemy army. They analyzed its movements using military models. They expected it to behave like an intelligent opponent making strategic decisions. Tanaka saw something different. The swarm moved like a living thing, not like an army but like a migration, like a herd of animals following ancient instincts. The attacks were not military operations. They were feeding behaviors. She spent 3 sleepless nights building a predictive model. She used weather forecasting software and animal migration algorithms. She cross-referenced the swarm movements with energy signatures and resource concentrations. When she finished, she could predict where the swarm would attack next with 70% accuracy. Tanaka submitted her report through proper channels. The Veloxy command staff ignored it. The mathematics were too strange. The methodology was too unconventional. It came from a human, and humans were clearly unreliable. Colonel Webb faced a choice. He could accept the rejection and let his people keep dying in unpredictable ambushes. Or he could do something that violated every regulation in the hegemony military code. He chose the second option. Webb shared Tanaka's model with every human soldier under his command. Then he shared it with the non-human soldiers they had been fighting alongside. He gave it to the Taurian Tiger warriors who respected strength. He gave it to the stone-like Kravex who valued patience. He gave it to the four-armed Thessians who admired cleverness. Within a week, the information had spread through the entire sector. Soldiers began repositioning themselves before attacks came. Ambushes were predicted and countered. Casualty rates dropped by 15%. The Veloxy commanders were baffled. How had discipline improved so quickly? Why were the soldiers suddenly so effective? A Veloxy sergeant named Catherine approached Webb one evening in the station's mess hall. She was old for her species, with faded colors on her shell and scars on her mandibles. She had been fighting the swarm for 30 years. "How did you do it?" she asked. "The information spread so fast. Species that have hated each other for centuries are suddenly cooperating. How did you build trust so quickly?" Webb looked up from his meal. The mess hall was crowded with soldiers from 8 different species. Humans sat next to Taurians. Thessians argued good-naturedly with Kravex. A group in the corner was teaching each other card games from their homeworlds. "Practice," he said simply. "Practice. On Earth, we have over 7,000 languages, 7,000 ways of seeing the world, 7,000 different cultures that have been learning to live together for thousands of years. We fight each other, yes, but we also learn to understand each other. We learn to translate. We learn to find common ground." He gestured at the crowded mess hall. "You see aliens. We see people who are different from us, and we have a lot of experience dealing with people who are different from us." Catherine was silent for a long moment. Her compound eyes reflected the lights of the mess hall. "The hegemony has spent 10,000 years trying to unite against the swarm," she said finally. "We have failed. Species distrust each other. Old hatreds run deep. And yet you humans have been here for 1 month, and already you are building bridges that we could never build." Webb smiled. It was a tired smile, worn down by weeks of fighting and dying and struggling to survive. "That is what we do," he said. "We connect. We adapt. We find a way to work together even when it seems impossible, because that is the only way we have ever survived." Outside the station, the Void Swarm gathered for another assault. But for the first time in a very long time, the defenders were ready. 6 months after their arrival, the Void Swarm launched its largest offensive in a decade. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Massive waves of swarm creatures poured through the asteroid fields, so many that they blotted out the stars. The station's sensors screamed warnings. Alarms echoed through every corridor. Soldiers scrambled to battle stations knowing that this might be the end. General Kethsaran, the Veloxy commander of Station Korath 7, made the only decision that hegemony doctrine allowed. He ordered a fighting retreat. Standard procedure against swarm numerical superiority. Fall back, preserve forces, regroup at the next defensive line. It was the safe choice. It was the smart choice. It was the choice that had kept the hegemony alive for 10,000 years of slow, grinding defeat. Colonel Webb refused. He stood in the command center and looked at the tactical display showing the approaching swarm. Around him, officers from 6 different species waited for his response. The Veloxy general's order glowed on every screen. "No," Webb said. The silence that followed was absolute. "You cannot refuse," General Kethsaran's voice crackled through the communication system. "I am your commanding officer. This is a direct order." "I understand," Webb replied. "I refuse anyway." Dr. Alina Vasquez had spent the past 6 months studying every Void Swarm specimen she could get her hands on. Captured creatures, recovered bodies, biological samples scraped from battlefield wreckage. She had dissected and analyzed and tested while everyone else was fighting. Now she stood beside Webb with a data pad in her hands and hope in her eyes. "The swarm is not a hive mind," she announced. "Everyone has assumed they share one consciousness, one will. They do not. They are individuals connected by pheromone signals, chemical communication like insects on Earth." She pulled up diagrams on the main display. Chemical structures, signal patterns, biological pathways. Disrupt the pheromones and the swarm loses coordination. They become confused, disorganized. They stop attacking as one and start acting as millions of separate creatures. The officers stared at her. This was impossible. The hegemony had fought the swarm for 10,000 years. How could one human doctor discover something so important in just 6 months? How do we disrupt these signals? A Taurian captain asked. We need to produce a specific chemical compound, Vasquez replied. The good news is that the base components are common. The technology to synthesize it exists. The bad news is that we would need to produce massive quantities very quickly. Corporal James Adebio stepped forward. He was the farmer's son from Nigeria, the one who had kept his village alive through famine using improvised irrigation. He looked at the chemical formula on the screen and began to laugh. This is pest control, he said. Everyone turned to stare at him. I am serious. This compound is similar to what we use to disrupt insect swarms on Earth, modified pheromone blockers. We use them to protect crops. Can you produce it? Webb asked. Not with agricultural equipment, Adebio replied. But these compounds, these base chemicals, they exist in many systems aboard this station. Medical synthesizers, food processors, engine coolant systems. If we repurpose the equipment, if we modify the production lines. He trailed off, his eyes moving rapidly as he calculated. We can make enough to blanket the entire sector, he finished. But we would need to tear apart half the station's systems to do it. General Kethsaren's voice cut through again. This is madness. You cannot dismantle essential systems in the middle of a battle. I am ordering all human forces to begin immediate retreat. Webb turned off the communication channel. Anyone who wants to follow the general's orders is free to do so, he said to the assembled officers. But I am staying. We have a chance to change everything. A chance to actually defeat the swarm instead of just running away from it. I am not going to waste that chance. He looked around the room at the faces of soldiers from 8 different species, Veloxi and Taurians, Kravex and Thessians, humans and others whose names he could barely pronounce. Who is with me? Captain Tanaka was the first to step forward. I can coordinate the equipment modifications, she said. Tell me what you need built and I will build it. The Taurian captain was next. My warriors will hold the line while you work, he growled. Give us a target worth fighting for and we will fight. One by one, they stepped forward. Officers and soldiers from species that had distrusted each other for millennia. They did not do it for the hegemony. They did not do it for orders or duty or regulation. They did it because, for the first time in 10,000 years, someone had given them hope. The next 72 hours were chaos. Soldiers fought running battles through the asteroid fields while engineers tore apart the station's systems. Medical bays became chemical laboratories. Food processors became pheromone synthesizers. Engine parts were repurposed into delivery systems. Webb did not sleep. None of them slept. There was no time. On the 3rd day, as the swarm prepared for its final assault, they activated the disruptors. The effect was immediate. The approaching wave of swarm creatures shuddered and slowed. Their perfect coordination shattered. They began bumping into each other, attacking randomly, moving in circles instead of straight lines. The defenders counterattacked. When the Battle of Korath 7 ended, the Void Swarm had suffered its first strategic defeat in 40 years. Not just a retreat, not just a temporary setback, but a genuine defeat. Thousands of swarm creatures captured or destroyed. A major assault broken and scattered. General Kethsaren stood in the ruined command center and stared at the aftermath. His compound eyes reflected the debris floating in space, the fires burning on distant asteroids, the impossible victory that should never have happened. "What are you?" he asked finally, turning to face Colonel Webb. "What kind of species disobeys direct orders, tears apart their own defenses, and somehow wins?" Webb looked out the viewport at the joint forces working together. Humans treating wounded Veloxi, a Taurian engineer celebrating with a human private, Kravex and Thessians sharing food and stories. "We are persistence predators," he said. "Not for hunting, for surviving, for building. You studied our wars but missed the point. We did not survive 10,000 years of fighting each other through strength. We survived through stubbornness, adaptation, and the insane belief that the stranger next to us might become a friend if we gave it enough time. The general was silent. You wanted warriors, Webb continued. You got humans, and now you understand why that might be the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. 1 year after the Battle of Korath 7, Colonel Webb received a message that made no sense. The Void Swarm wanted to talk. He read the transmission 3 times, certain that he had misunderstood. For 10,000 years, the Swarm had never communicated with the hegemony, never negotiated, never shown any sign of intelligence beyond the brutal efficiency of predators hunting prey. They attacked, they consumed, they moved on. That was all they did. That was all they had ever done. Until now. The summons came from Hegemony Central Command, a massive space station at the heart of the Allied territories. Webb was ordered to bring his senior staff immediately. No explanation was given. The journey took 3 days through hyperspace, and Webb spent every moment wondering what was waiting for them. What he found was chaos. The Supreme Council chamber was filled with representatives from every species in the hegemony. They argued and shouted and clicked their mandibles in distress. Decades of careful political balance had been shattered by a simple message from their ancient enemy. They want to negotiate, Ambassador Kethforin said. He looked older than he had a year ago when he first arrived on Earth. His exoskeleton had faded. His movements were slower. The Swarm has requested a formal meeting, a peace conference. That is impossible, a Kravex delegate rumbled. The Swarm does not think, it does not plan, it only consumes. And yet they have sent an emissary, Kethforin replied. A single creature, traveling alone, broadcasting signals of peaceful intent. It is waiting at the edge of hegemony space. The chamber erupted in more arguments. Some demanded that the emissary be destroyed immediately. Others wanted to capture it for study. A few suggested that it might be a trap, a new tactic designed to lower their defenses. Webb raised his hand and waited for silence. What exactly did the message say? He asked. Kethforin hesitated. His compound eyes focused on Webb with an expression that might have been embarrassment. They want to speak with the new species, he said. The ones who found a way to communicate through combat. The ones whose ships broadcast welcome messages in 100 languages alongside their weapons fire. The ones who captured Swarm soldiers and treated their wounds instead of executing them. The chamber fell silent. They want to speak with the humans, a Theshan delegate said. The Swarm wants to talk to the humans. Webb thought about the past year. He thought about the wounded Swarm creatures that Dr. Vasquez had insisted on treating instead of killing. He thought about the messages of peace that Captain Tanaka had programmed into their communication systems, broadcasting on every frequency alongside their tactical commands. He thought about the Swarm prisoners who had been fed and housed and studied with curiosity instead of hatred. He had not known if any of it would matter. He had simply done what seemed right, what seemed human. Now the Swarm had noticed. General Chen arrived from Earth 2 days later. She looked the same as she had when Webb last saw her, calm and confident and carrying secrets behind her eyes. She reviewed the situation quickly and then asked the question that no one else had thought to ask. What do the Swarm want to talk about? The answer came from the emissary itself. The creature was brought to a secure chamber at the edge of the station, separated from the delegates by 3 layers of force fields and a dozen armed guards. It looked like nothing Webb had ever seen, a being of chitin and bioluminescence, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness. When it spoke, its voice was like static and wind, and something almost musical. We did not know, it said. For 10,000 of your years we did not know. Did not know what? General Chen asked. That you could hear us, that you could understand, that communication was possible. The chamber was absolutely silent. "We are not one mind," the emissary continued. "We are many minds connected but separate. We have always tried to speak, to reach out, to make contact with the strange creatures that lived in the cold spaces between the warm places where we feed, but no one ever answered. No one ever tried to understand." It turned its glowing eyes toward Webb. "Until your species is different. You send messages of peace even while fighting. You capture our soldiers and treat them kindly instead of destroying them. You studied us not as enemies to be eliminated, but as creatures to be understood." Webb felt something strange in his chest, something like hope and sorrow mixed together. "We were at war," he said. "You were attacking us, killing us." "We were hungry," the emissary replied. "We are always hungry. The warm places call to us and we must feed. We did not understand that we were causing harm. We did not know that you were people like us, capable of thought and feeling and choice." "How could you not know?" a Veloxy delegate demanded. "You have destroyed 1,000 worlds, consumed civilizations that had existed for millions of years." "We did not know they were civilizations," the emissary said. "We saw only food, only warmth, only the endless hunger that drives us forward. But the humans, they showed us something different. They showed us that communication was possible, that understanding could exist between species so different they might as well be from different universes." General Chen stepped forward. She was small compared to most of the beings in the chamber, an elderly human woman facing a creature from the depths of nightmare. But she did not seem afraid. "What do you want?" she asked. "We want to learn," the emissary said. "We want to understand. We want to find a way to exist that does not require us to consume everything in our path. We want to be people like you." The silence that followed lasted for a very long time. Finally, Colonel Webb walked toward the emissary. Guards moved to stop him, but General Chen waved them back. Webb approached the force fields and looked into the creature's glowing eyes. 10,000 years of war," he said. 1,000 worlds destroyed, millions of lives lost, and now you want peace." "Yes," the emissary said. "We want peace. We want understanding. We want to learn how to be more than what we are." Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a book, worn and weathered, translated into the simple pictographic language that humans had developed for communicating with non-human species. A children's story from Earth about a rabbit and a fox who learned to trust each other. He set the book down where the emissary could see it. "Then we will start with something simple," he said. "We will start with a story." Ambassador Kethvorin approached General Chen as the negotiations began. He moved slowly, carefully, like a being whose entire understanding of the universe had just been shattered and rebuilt. "We sought your warriors," he said, "and you sent us your people, your doctors and builders and farmers. We thought you were mocking us. We thought you were weak." General Chen smiled. "We sent you exactly what you asked for," she replied. "You wanted our strongest. You just did not understand what makes us strong." Outside the chamber, the stars burned cold and distant. The galaxy stretched away in all directions, filled with wonders and horrors that humanity was only beginning to discover. But in that moment, in that small room at the edge of known space, something new was beginning, something that had never existed before in all the long history of the cosmos. A conversation, a bridge, a chance for understanding between species, so different they should have been enemies forever. The humans had come to the stars expecting to fight. Instead, they had found something more important. They had found a way to make peace. And that, in the end, was what made humanity the strongest species in the galaxy.